Hey everybody, KC here. So, longtime readers will know or may remember that a few years ago I went on a rant about Starbucks because I decided to end their home subscription business. And this really bothered me. I mean, their logic behind it was that they wanted to every people to go and have the store experience. And I said, well, wait a minute. I'm having the store experience sometimes, but I'm ordering it, I'm having it delivered to the house. I really like having it that way. I'm drinking it home. Why are you getting in the way of that? Why are you dictating to me how I enjoy your coffee? Now, the irony here, of course, is that a lot of their stores have been closed for the last 6 months. Might have been a good thing to have that subscription business, but back then they decided they weren't going to do it. Well, a friend of mine named Henry Stein got in touch with me and said, "Hey, Kevin, I am actually working for a company called City Girl Coffee, and we do subscriptions. You might be interested in trying it." So I said, "Yeah, I would love to." So it ends up, for several years now, we've been drinking City Girl coffee every morning. We drink their Blondie from Brazil. And basically, the great thing about City Girl coffee, and this is the thing Henry told me from the beginning, is it is a company owned by women, by a woman, and run by a woman. And it is a company that sources all of its beans from plantations that are owned and operated by women. So the whole notion is about women empowerment. Well, this is a great story, right? So not only do I drink coffee that's delicious, but I feel good about it every morning because I feel like I'm supporting a worthy cause. And they've got some distribution. I know in Minnesota where they're from, they're at Lunds and Byerly's. I think they're at Target. I think they're at Whole Foods, maybe Kowalski's, and they've got some national distribution, and they deserve to grow. Anyway, I wanted to talk to the woman who started all this, Alyza Bohbot James, because I wanted to talk about the notion of being a purpose-driven company. How does it change the way you come to market, if it does at all? How do you measure success? And what are the kinds of successes that you've seen in terms of the impact that you've had? I really wanted to talk to her mostly because I really like her coffee. Um, but I found it to be a really interesting interview. I hope you do too. Enjoy. So, Alyza, welcome to Morning Newsbeat. I am so excited to have you.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
Um, I've already kind of explained to the audience exactly kind of my connection to City Girl Coffee. Tell us a little bit about how it started.
Yeah, so City Girl Coffee is a brand underneath our company, Alyza Coffee Roasters. And Alyza is a company that was started by my mom and dad in 1990. And kind of the backstory of that is important to how we got to where we are today. But my father is originally from Morocco. Actually, I say my father's from Morocco, my mother's from Florida. They met and married in Israel, and of course, naturally ended up in Duluth, Minnesota in 1983. Because where else in the world would you belong?
Makes sense.
Or would you go, um, but nonetheless, when they kind of ended up there, my father was used to robust European style of coffee, and in the early mid 1980s, you just really couldn't find that in northern Minnesota. I mean, there were some folks who were exploring specialty coffee in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and certainly in other parts of the country, but not so much in Duluth. And so he's a chemist by degree. So my mom, really understands kind of the science behind things. My mom bought him a small little coffee roaster and some green coffee, and he started roasting in our kitchen just for his own consumption, and started to kind of give the coffee to friends and neighbors, and people would drink it and say, wow, this is like nothing I'm used to. They would drink coffee at church and put lots of cream and sugar in it, and it was just kind of a whole different experience. And so people said, you should really sell this in grocery stores. So everyone kind of thought they were crazy because they're going, well, no one's going to pay that kind of money for coffee, and no one's going to care about specialty coffee in the Midwest. You're never going to get people to kind of care about this outside of the coast. And he said, I think you're all wrong. So they started the Alyza Coffee Roasting Company in 1990, and really just it grew from there. And then meanwhile, I went off to college and graduated and had -0 interest in running the coffee business, and actually had every intention of being a high school guidance counselor. And one day my parents kind of came to me and said, we are kind of ready to retire, and if you're not interested in the company, then that is absolutely fine. We'll support you no matter what, but we're probably going to sell the company if you're not interested. And at that time, I just had this gut instinct. I didn't want to see the company leave our family, and I was fortunate enough to have some friends who kind of looked at me and said, wow, I was 26, I think, at the time. And they said, what 26-year-old has this opportunity to take a business like that? And I got excited about what that might look like. So I moved back I kind of said to my parents, listen, what if I come back for 6 months? We'll try it, we'll test it out. And if I feel passionate about it, the way that you feel passionate about it, then we can kind of talk about a longer term opportunity and plan. And so I came back and I very quickly realized I did have the passion for it. But what I realized was, well, my parents had built this fantastic company known for quality and customer service and integrity. They hadn't invested significantly in marketing and branding and advertising, mostly because they didn't need to, right? In 1990, they were one of a handful of specialty coffee producers. But now when I came back into the business, the landscape of the marketplace had gotten incredibly saturated with independent coffee roasters who were doing much of the same things we were. And so a couple of things happened. Number one, I knew if I was going to take over ownership of the business and really continue to not just exist, but to grow and thrive, we were going to have to do something to kind of reinvent ourselves and differentiate ourselves. But number two, I didn't want to just take my parents' company and run it for what they had already existing. I wanted to be able to come into the business and create something that felt more representative of me and my voice and the next generation of coffee drinkers. And I did not know what that was going to look like until I went to the Specialty Coffee Association conference in Seattle. This would have been spring of, I think, 2014. And I attended a breakfast for an organization, and they really talked about, or there I really was open to the inequity that women producers face. And in fact, this organization was getting ready to launch a biannual event in Colombia. And a gentleman came up and told a story about a husband and wife in Colombia who owned a farm. And because Colombia has been so war-torn, the husband had to go and fight and was unfortunately killed. And the wife took ownership of the farm. Key piece of their machinery breaks down, and she goes to the banks to ask for a loan, and they refused it to her because she was a woman. And I was so struck by that story because I was 5 when my parents started the company. So I had grown up in this business and had virtually no idea of just the scale of the inequity that existed for these women. And so that was kind of my aha moment to say, okay, wait a second, we could create something that's not only, feminine and representative of me and my voice, but that really brings awareness to this issue that I find so important. And that's when the City Girl Coffee Company was born.
How did you identify partner companies? Because it's basically the idea, as I understand it, is that all of the companies from which you source your coffee are women-owned and largely women-run.
Mm-hmm.
And so, how do you identify them? Is that easier than it sounds? Because it sounds like it would be an utter nightmare to me.
Yeah, I mean, and initially when I had this concept and it was, okay, we're going to source exclusively from women and we're going to work with organizations to give back to them and really make sure that they have access to marketplace and education and resources. And so I started with relationships with importers that I had, who I knew were really on the cutting edge of sourcing from women and who had their pulse on, the farming and sort of this from seed to cup. We often say in our industry, we sort from seed to cup in our industry, and they had their hands in the pulse in the seed. And so I went to these importers and I said, hey, this is my idea. This is my concept. We want to source from women growers. And we started there, right? We started with that network of women producers that these importers had relationships with. And then, through that, working with the organizations Cafe Femenino and working with the International Women's Coffee Alliance and really making sure that we were sourcing responsibly and sourcing from women, and that we were working with these organizations to see how we could invest in these women. But what's been cool is just to, when we started, it was like, okay, we've got maybe 2 or 3 countries that we can source from because that's where we know we can source women-owned coffee. And now, oftentimes we get requests from women producers and we don't yet have an avenue to sell that coffee. And so that's what's kind of sometimes exciting about the growth of not only our company, but the awareness that has come out of, the work that we're doing is, as we continue to grow and progress, there will be more and more avenues. And so finding these partnerships and really making sure we can source from them is going to be even more critical.
Oh, I'm sure once the word went forth that there was a company interested in coffee from women-owned and run organizations, I'm sure it spread like wildfire simply because people are going to go, oh, now we're going to have an outlet, somebody who's going to be interested in us for more than just the beans that we produce.
For sure. And, I often say, we weren't the first to have this idea. We won't be the last, but I hope that we are the loudest, right? I hope that, that's sort of our goal, is to be out there and to be a champion for women throughout our entire supply chain. So whether that's from the women we're sourcing from, or other women roasters, or, women coffee shop owners, really to support the entire supply chain and making sure that we all have a voice and we all have a place to exist and thrive.
Well, and it's interesting. I mean, to tell the story about the woman in Colombia not being able to get a loan from the bank. We're only days from, the passing of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who, couldn't get hired by a law firm because she was a woman in New York.
Yeah.
So these stories are not, they're not that dissimilar, and they're not that distant.
Yeah.
So running what I think can be identified as a purpose-driven company, certainly the City Girl part of it. Is it different than running the mainstream business? Are there different metrics you use for success? I mean, or has that bled over into the mainstream business? How does that work?
Yeah, I mean, we're still one company. We may separate at some point, but we still are one organization. And I think the major differences has been in the channels we serve to. So Alakef was really built from independent coffee shops, food service. We had some grocery business, but it was really kind of centrally located within Minnesota, and it was really kind of Midwest, North Shore focused. Whereas with City Girl, the majority above and beyond of our business has been through grocery retail. And so it's just, a different beast. It's just a different profit structure. And so having to kind of walk those lines of what does that mean for cash flow, and what does that mean for investments, and how do we scale and grow, because our business has really shifted, and not only how it's getting to the consumer, but also how we're having to produce the product in-house.
But it doesn't change the metrics in terms of
No.
ROI or anything like that.
No, I mean, I think you look at, most businesses, you look at a couple of key factors, and you look at, revenue, and you look at profitability, and you look at your cost of goods, and all of those things. It just, again, has changed because of the way that we're sourcing and the give back component, and, the numbers are maybe not as pretty as they once were, because we're investing so much in building this brand, but we're also, we're investing in realizing that, hey, we've got to, we're not purchasing huge pallets of coffee necessarily. Sometimes, for example, when, a couple years back, there was a woman in Honduras. She had 3 hectares. She produced, I think, 27 bags of coffee a year. We purchased 3 of them from her, right? And so that's just a different way of sourcing coffee.
And that sounds like a very small amount to me.
It is.
Okay.
Yeah. It is a very small amount. And so, that's not always the case, and we're not always going to do that. But what's challenging then as you grow, especially the way that we're growing, is you really have to be sensitive and thoughtful about the coffee that you're bringing in, and making sure that you're able to do justice by that coffee and that producer and that farmer, and make sure that there's an avenue and a customer waiting, because the worst thing would be is to source this coffee and then not have a way to beautifully tell the story.
Well, and that was going to be my next question. One of the things that we talk a lot about on Morning Newsbeat, and I'm always talking to retailers about this, is the notion of telling a story. And I guess, do you work with retailers so they're able to tell your story in those aisles? I mean, the bag says, empowering women of coffee, but beyond that, is there an effort to kind of to enlarge on that narrative in the store to attract people to your part of the aisle?
It depends on the store. Every grocery store especially has such a different set of rules or guidelines when it comes to, what you can put in the aisle, what you can put on the shelf. So at stores like Whole Foods, we have an amazing opportunity to really tell that story. And we've got, a picture of myself there and kind of talking the story of women owned and local. And in other situations, we have, opportunities to put the pictures of growers on, shelf talkers or whatever it may be. Certainly within the food service channel, there's a much bigger opportunity to tell that story in a way that's airpot wraps or table menu cards. When we do direct consumer online, there's a really wonderful opportunity there to send more information. But yeah, it's so dependent on the individual store. But certainly we know, and it was very clear to us early on, that the way for us to succeed and to break through the noise that sort of is the coffee aisle. I mean, you go to the coffee section at any store and the choice is immense. And so for us to break through, we did have to find a way to tell that story. And so we were pretty adamant about trying to tell that story at the point of purchase, but also doing a lot of demos and just getting in front of the consumer whenever possible.
Well, and as I've told you and I've told my audience, it was the story that immediately appealed, right? It just cut through and said, oh, the coffee's really good. And and there's this great story I can tell people, and I feel good about it. I mean, I just feel good about drinking it beyond the fact that it keeps me going at 5:30 in the morning when I start morning newsbeat. Can you have any anecdotes about like a grower that you've worked with where you've walked away from it and said, okay, we're really making a difference here?
Yeah, there is one specific anecdote that always comes to mind, and it was a few years back in Atlanta when the Specialty Coffee Show was there. We attended the breakfast for the Cafe Femenino Foundation, and we had sent them some of our Guatemala coffee, which is sourced through the Cafe Femenino Foundation. We are one of their associated producers and co-ops. But we had sent them some Guatemala coffee, and we went to the breakfast, and one of their producers was there. Now, I don't speak Spanish, really. She didn't speak English, but one of our importers was there translating, and she was, pretty close to tears and was saying, thank you so much for purchasing our coffee. It's because of partners like you that we now don't just sell coffee. We sell honey, we sell jewelry, we sell clothing, and I'm not just a mom, a wife, a daughter. I can contribute to the family. And what that meant to her to be able to contribute to her family, to contribute to her community, was immeasurable. And so that was like the moment, I look back and I'm like, yes, okay, we're doing something that has real significance and that is impacting these women and is making a difference, not just for them and their nuclear family, but what that does for the greater community is so significant, and it's exciting.
So look forward a little bit. What would you like to do in terms of continuing to push your purpose forward that you haven't done yet? What's a goal?
Yeah, I think for us, it's becoming a nationally recognized brand. People often have asked me, what is the vision you have for the company and what is the goal? And there are pros and cons that come with growth as a company, right? I mean, there are certain things that are a lot easier. There are certain things that certainly become a lot more difficult. And to me, growth, while sometimes daunting, is very exciting, because to me, what growth means is the bigger that we get as a company, the more good we could do to the more people around the world, right? The larger impact we can have and the further that impact can touch. And so that's just hard to do when, you're kind of still in these infancy phases. And so I truly believe if we're able to kind of grow and gain that national recognition and have a larger distribution channel, that we'll be able to do so much more with what we have.
Well, listen, as you know, I'm a big fan. I hope that there'll be a Morning Newsbeat reader who will watch this interview and pick up the phone. I'll make sure I provide some contact information beneath the. Well, actually, well, let me ask you, if they want to reach you, how do they do that?
Yeah, so you can send us email at info@citygirlcoffee.com. You can visit our website. We're sold on Amazon.com. You know, we're sold at a number of grocery stores, Target, regionally, Whole Foods locally within the kind of Minneapolis area, Hy-Vee, Giant Foods out on the East Coast. So you can kind of, if there's not a store near you, we also have a form on our website that you can download and bring to your local store and ask for them to bring us in.
Well, and more importantly, people who are watching this are retailers, so they want to reach out because they may want to carry your product and help to tell your story. So, well, listen, Alyza, thank you so much for doing this. I appreciate it. Good luck, and keep the coffee coming because it's keeping me going.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you having me on.
Okay, take care. Thank you.
Bye.